morning and welcome to another Pebble in the Pond video. This is a continuation in the Head-On series in the book of John, chapter 18. Basically, it deals with Jesus' betrayal and arrest and so on. So here we go. Jesus said in chapter 17, verse 26, had just concluded his prayer that he had prayed over his disciples and closed in saying that they love each other wherewith thou hast loved me, and that they may be in them and I in them. That is the love of God. God's love in them and Jesus' love in them, and living through the Holy Ghost in love with each other. All right. Verse 1, when Jesus had spoken these words, in other words, said that prayer, he went forth with his disciples over the brook Cedron, where was a garden, and into which he entered, and his disciples. And Judas also, which betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus oftentimes resorted there with his disciples, the Garden of Gethsemane. And Judas then, having received a band of men and officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came with lanterns and torches and weapons. And Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that should come upon him, went forth to them. So he saw them coming at a distance and went forth to them and said unto them, Whom seek thee? Whom seek ye? And they answered him and said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said unto them, I am he. And Judas also, which betrayed him, stood with them. And as soon as he had said unto them, I am he, they all went backwards and fell to the ground. This is very unique because it was a tiny show of power, of the awesome power that he did to allow his disciples to leave freely, which we'll see down here in verse 8. So they all fell backwards to the ground, basically knocked them down. And then he asked him again, well, whom seek ye? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said, well, I have told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, you let these go their way. And they did, that the saying might be fulfilled which he spake of them which thou hast given me, I have lost none. He didn't want any of them being bound up and killed along with him. Verse 10, then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and smote the high priest's servant and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Then said Jesus unto Peter, put up thy sword into the sheath. The cup, my destiny, which my Father hath given me right to do, shall I not drink it or do it? Then the band and the captain and the officers of the Jew took Jesus and bound him. Now, in the Gospels, we have other accounts of the same occurrence, and he puts the ear back on to Malchus, the servant of the high priest, and heals it on the spot. So the question in 10 would be, before we move on, is having a sword. Why would Peter have a sword after being with Jesus so long? Well, you remember the things changed. First, he sent him out without personal script to rely totally on God and other believers in the way wherever they went. And so the secondary position was, he said, to take your money, take your personal script, take a coat when you go out, be prepared, sell some things and buy a sword. And they said, I think it was, well, we have 2 swords here, Lord. And he said, that's enough. So he didn't push the let's all go get armed mentality that's out there today. There were a few swords, and he said that was enough. And one of these swords was on Peter's hip, and he used it. Okay. So then, after the ear deal was over, in verse 12, then the band that came with this, this mob, and the captain and the officers of the Jews took Jesus and bound him like he was some common criminal. They cuffed him, but back then they didn't use handcuffs. So they tied him up with leather or something. And they led him away to Annas first. Now Annas, for he was the father-in-law to Caiaphas, which was the high priest that same year. So they had elections or whatever to get the leaders of the church. Now Caiaphas was he which gave counsel to the Jews that it was expedient that one man should die for the people. Verse 15, and Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. That disciple was known unto the high priest, and went in with Jesus into the palace of the high priest. Now this palace had an inner and an outer, and how, I don't even know how many rooms it had, but it had several. But Peter, he stood at the door outside, right? And you got to keep in mind here with Peter, he's unconverted. Yeah, he's a disciple, and he's about to receive his apostleship when the Lord comes back, which will come pretty soon. But right now he's an unconverted man, and of course Jesus told him that as much, because he said, "You're going to deny me before the rooster crowed." So for Peter, but Peter stood at the door without, and then went out the other disciple, which went with them, which was known unto the high priest, and spake unto her that kept the door, and brought in Peter. So they didn't just let anybody in. There was somebody trying to keep just their followers inside. Then saith the damsel that kept the door unto Peter, art not thou also one of this man's disciples? He saith, I am not. First denial. And the servants and officers stood there, who made a fire of coals, for it was cold. And they warmed themselves, and Peter stood with them and warmed himself as well. Now he's not outside the synagogue per se. He's on an inner sanction, maybe the first area before you start going into different areas of the temple and synagogue. Verse 19, the high priest then asked Jesus of his disciples, right, and of his doctrine. So they're probably saying, we want the names of all your disciples so they can track them down, eliminate them. And we want to know of all your doctrine. What are your teachings in particular? And verse 20, Jesus answered him and said, hey. No, he didn't say hey. He said, I spake openly in the world, to the world, and I always taught in the synagogue and in the temple, where the Jews always resort, and in secret have I said nothing. Why askest thou me? Ask them which heard me what I have said unto them. Behold, they know what I said. And when he had thus spoken, one of the officers which stood by struck Jesus with the palm of his hand. In other words, he slapped him. And I'm sure it wasn't a kitty slap. Saying, answerest thou the high priest so? And Jesus answered him, if I have spoken evil, bear witness. In other words, tell everybody here, what have I done of the evil? But if I have spoken well, in other words, the truth, why smitest thou me? Why hit me? Now Annas had sent him bound unto Caiaphas the high priest. And Simon Peter stood and warmed himself outside, remember, with the servants and the officers. And they, these servants and officers, said therefore unto him, art not thou also one of the disciples? And he denied it and said, I am not. Second denial. But in verse 26, one of the servants of the high priest, being his kinsman, in other words, a relative of Malchus, right, of whose ear Peter cut off, said, did not I see thee in the garden with him? And then Peter denied again, and immediately the rooster crowed. It says crew here, but it crowed. 29. Okay. Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment. The hall of judgment is where all the official sentencing would take place of the authorities in that area. It'd be kind of like going to the courthouse in our day. And it was early, right? Very early. And they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled. Because they had some custom that you don't go in where they sentence people to death. but they might eat the Passover. So they wanted to stay in this kind of a cleaned up position that they thought they were in, even though they're trying to get a man killed here, and eat the Passover on the Sabbath, which is when they ate that seventh day of rest. That's when they would eat this Sabbath feast of the Passover, remembering when the firstborn of Israel were saved and all the rest were killed in Egypt. Verse 29, Pilate then went out unto them and said, obviously they might be really close together, this temple, synagogue, and a hall of judgment, and where Pilate resides. What accusation or what charges do you bring against this man? Then answered, and they said unto him, well, if he were not a malefactor, in other words, if he were not a criminal or a bad guy, we would have not delivered him up unto thee. Then said Pilate unto them, take ye him and judge him according to your law. In other words, go away. That was his first. There's, I think, 7 total we'll see in this chapter and the next, where Pilate tried to release him, said he was innocent, didn't want to have anything to do with him, and this is the first one. Take him, go away, and you judge him yourself. The Jews therefore said unto him, it is not lawful for us to put any man to death. In other words, we don't have the right to kill anybody. Funny. They didn't have the right, but they wanted somebody else to do it for them. Okay, so 32, that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spake, signifying what death he should die. Then Pilate entered into the judgment hall again, called Jesus, and said unto him, excuse me, art thou the king of the Jews? Jesus answered and said unto him, askest this thing of thyself, or did others tell it to you of me? Pilate answered and said, am I a Jew? In other words, am I supposed to know you, and I'm supposed to know what's going on here? Thine own nation and thy chief priests have delivered thee unto me. What hast thou done? Jesus answered, my kingdom, so he's telling him he is a king, is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from here. Interesting, he says, but now. Eventually it will be on this world when he returns. Verse 37, Pilate therefore said unto him, art thou a king then? Even though he said my kingdom, he wants to hear it plain. And Jesus answered, and thou sayest that I am a king. To this end was I born. In other words, he's confirming it again. And for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth of God, right? Everyone that is of the truth of God heareth his voice. Pilate saith unto him, what is truth? In other words, what is this truth you're speaking of? And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and saith unto them, I find in him no fault at all. That's the second time. But ye have a custom. So Pilate's trying to give him an out here, that I should release unto you one at the Passover. Will you therefore that I release unto you the King of the Jews? That's his third attempt to set Jesus free, that I release him, he says. Then cried they all again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. I think he also a murderer. And that's the end of today's chapter. It's not a very long one. In 18, and we'll continue on in 19, Lord willing. Tomorrow, have a blessed day. Get in the Word today. Pray before you enter the Word for wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, that you might rightly divide the Word of God. And keep the faith. Don't give up hope. Have a good day.